What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion there, and let's continue our Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft coverage, this time as we talk about fear and stress, another section of the Horror Toolkit found in the chapter 4 or towards the back of the book. Before we dive into that, hey, if you like what I do here and you like the channel and my coverage of all this stuff, consider subscribing. It really does help. All right, so here we go. Fear and stress. Now, we already have the concept of fear as in the frightened condition in 5th edition. That exists. We know about that. But this is, I feel like the frightened condition, while yes, your character is mechanically frightened, it doesn't really, like, truly, I feel like, come off as being afraid, if that makes sense. Like, you are frightened, but it's just purely mechanical. So this talks about kind of, I guess if you want to call it fear to another level, more like terror, right? So it instills this concept of seeds of fear, and I guess the closest thing you could relate a seed of fear to would be a phobia. That's basically what it is, some sort of triggering instance that generates fear within your character, right? So aside from supernatural sources, fear is subjective and personal, which is true, right? The seeds of fear table offers some examples. These can change over time as characters grow. A character never has more than 3 seeds of fear. If you gain a new seed of fear and already have 3, choose which one to be replaced. You can see they give you 12 options here. Again, standard stuff, right? Fear the dark, tight spaces, heights, being followed chills my blood. I can't be comfortable around creatures larger than me. You know, there's a variety of different things. Some of them are, you know, realistic, you know, real world fears. Others are, they're still real fears, they're just, I feel like, less common. Like, for example, I can't be comfortable around creatures larger than I am. I don't know, I'm assuming that's someone's real world fear, but again. And then how to use a seed of fear in a campaign. When a character encounters a seed of fear, they interact with the situation in a way that reinforces the seed, such as screaming, stumbling back. Consider giving the character inspiration for their fear-focused reaction. Once a character gains inspiration in this way, they should be able to do it again. And that all sounds well and good, but I do think we need to read this example because I think it'll help to sell it and make sense to everybody, right? So for example, imagine that a character has the seed of fear. I hate being stuck in tight spaces and must squeeze through a narrow crack in a cave wall to continue an adventure. If the player portrays the character's response in a way that reinforces that fear, such as refusing, finding another way around, taking time and making noise to widen the crack, or portraying some other fearful response, these would be perfect opportunities to reward the player's consideration of a seed of fear by granting their character inspiration. That sounds great. This, I can see, will 100%, if it's followed like that, will piss people off. I think it's great, and I fully embrace and understand the concept. That will piss off some people at a table. Not everyone, but if my character is afraid of going into tight spaces, and like, we need to go through this tunnel to get to the next part of the adventure, do whatever we're doing, and Ted the player, says, I'll excavate the tunnel and make it bigger, making a ton of noise. If my party members at the table, you know, obviously if it's people you can play with for a long time and you're fully embracing this, it won't be an issue. But if I say, yeah, I'm going to excavate out this tunnel because it makes my character not be less afraid of things, this 100% could piss people off. I'm not saying that that's the right response, because I don't think it is. I do appreciate and would love to see a player embrace it to that degree. But I'm sure either you or you know someone who would be like, really, dude? Come on. Like, you can't just tough it out. But it's less like, it's the roleplay aspect, right? I mean, you should, if your character is afraid of that kind of stuff, they should have a proper reaction. So, you know, it doesn't really give a lot of stuff in there about you know, giving seeds of fear. But it says during character creation you can choose up to 2 seeds of fear. So it's really, it's not a required mechanic. I guess that's the thing I should say. It's something you would be voluntarily choosing to apply to your character. And then if you do so, you would have to play with it, which is something that, again, you should be discussing up front, whether it's in a Ravenloft campaign or another campaign. Are you going to utilize this whole fear mechanic? And if so, everyone has to kind of be willing to embrace the concept of this seeds of fear and role-playing the reaction accordingly. And you don't necessarily need to know what another player's fear is, but you need to know that if it comes up, they're going to role play it as kind of described here. Like, that's a hard line for my character. They're not going to go in a tight space. I'm going to find another way around, or I'm going to make the hole bigger, or I'm just out. Like, that's how it is. And that needs to be something that the DM understands. I mean, I would hope they would, considering they're the ones who opted to use these additional fear rules. But the other players need to be willing to embrace that fully. Because that, again, I'm positive when I describe that to you, you either know or have played with someone who would be like, well, all right, I guess, you know, this is kind of like, they're already fed up with the fact that you're going to play like come on, it's just do it. And I don't know, maybe it's just me and the people that I've played with, but I'm positive someone has interacted with someone like that. So let's move on to the actual section. So that was using them, and then it says fear. An overwhelming foe or horrid monster doesn't need magic or some supernatural ability to strike fear. During any frightful encounter, you can call on a character to make a saving throw to resist being scared. It's a DC 15 Wisdom saving throw, or be frightened until the end of their next turn. So this is sort of tapping in to the concept of fear, but also the frightened mechanic, which I like. So any of the following circumstances might be reasons to have one or more creatures have saving throws to resist to frightened. The character experiences a seed of fear, makes sense. An enemy is immune to a character's attacks or spells. An enemy demonstrates it can deal enough damage to reduce a character to 0 hit points in one blow. A creature is alien or monstrous in ways the character could never have imagined, or an object undermines a character's understanding of reality. So those I can immediately sort of pull correlations to other systems, right? So if you think of like Call of Cthulhu or something like that, fear is, and like sanity is a very big concept in that game. And if you're dealing with aberrations, mind flayers, beholders, other strange alien creatures, it might have serious lasting consequences on your character. Even if those creatures don't have a frightful presence, they could still be fear-inducing. And I like this. I would like to see this more, because I feel like most characters that have a frightful, or most enemies that have a frightful presence, it almost seems as though they need to actively utilize the frightful presence. Like it says, like a dragon, it can use its frightful presence and then make 3 attacks or whatever. And, you know, I mean, we see that when we're gamers, we've seen mind flayers before, but if you were to encounter something that looked like that in real life, I feel like that would mess you up. Like, you would be possibly frozen in fear. Like, it would just be so strange and alien that it would screw you up, and it would at least give you pause at the very least. I don't know about a character being immune to enemies' attacks or spells. I feel like that definitely gives me like an anime vibe, where the main character throws their signature attack and they're like, what? No, how could they be immune to this? Ah! And then they're just like sitting there, and then usually it ends up leading to one of their fellow characters either getting killed or severely hurt while they cope with the fact that their attacks are useless, and then usually they'll unlock whatever super uber power they have is, and then they overcome it. But this is D&D, not an anime. And then an enemy just, you know, it can reduce a character to 0 hit points. Yeah, that could be huge. You know, you're these tough, rough and tumble group of adventurers. You come in, and the enemy's just like whoosh, cuts down one of your teammates, and you're like, what? Again, probably bonus points if the other one being cut down is an NPC. We've seen that done a lot in a bunch of different games where they get taken out and it has a lasting effect on the party. But let's move on from fear to stress. Stress is not a mechanic that we currently have in the game. So I like, this is sort of like a little tweak. There's not a lot here. It's just this little blurb you see here, but charging headlong into terrifying situations is stock trade for adventurers. I think we can all agree on that. Among the domains of dread, though, periods of respite between harrowing experiences can be rare. Also, I think anybody who has played Curse of Strahd or similar games can understand that as well. Trying to find a moment to gain rest is difficult. Even the hardiest adventurers find themselves worn down. Various circumstances might cause a character stress. Stress can be tracked numerically as a stress score, so a brand new mechanic, increasing in situations and decreasing with care. At your discretion, a character's stress score might increase by 1 when one of the following situations occurs. A tense, dramatic moment experience, especially one involving one of the character's seeds of fear, so tying those two together. Every 24 hours, the character goes without finishing a long rest. This I like a lot. because that I think is very well done. Witnessing the death of a loved one, yep, that could definitely do it. A nightmare or the darkest fear made real. Again, that kind of ties into Seeds of Fear, but I like it. Shattering the character's fundamental understanding of reality. Once again, think of Sanity and Cthulhu stuff. Witnessing a person transform into a horrid or unnatural creature. Again, it always is an interesting concept of towing that line between D&D heroic adventurers and realistic stuff. Like if your character has a noble background and they were raised in a nobilistic lifestyle, maybe they're a fighter because they learned how to fence, you know, from fencing class. But that first time someone is killed in front of them, someone dies, someone blows something up, someone, you know, viscera and stuff is thrown around, that's legit. Like that might really seriously mess up your hoity-toity noble character. And you could play that up. When a character makes an attack roll, an ability check, or saving throw, they must apply their current stress score as a penalty to the roll. So if one of those things happens and it increases it's just a permanent -1 to attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws until you find a means to reduce that stress. So a character who spends any day relaxing in otherwise calm circumstances reduces their stress score by 1 when they finish a long rest. The Calm Emotion spell can be used to suppress the charmed and frightened conditions. Also suppresses the effect of one's stress score for the duration. And a Lesser Restoration spell reduces the target's stress score by 1. And a Greater Restoration spell reduces a character's stress score to 0. So I really like that because it adds Calm Emotion, giving, like, Calm Emotions can potentially be almost never used in your game, but this could add a use for that spell. It's not, although I do believe Calm Emotions is a 2nd level spell, and Lesser Restoration is also a 2nd level spell. So it comes down to what you have access to in your party, but Calm Emotions might be more readily available, but it temporarily staves off all of the negative effects of a stress score, whereas Lesser Restoration just drops it by 1. So if you have a -6 or you have a stress score of 6, it might be better to use Calm Emotions and sort of suppress it rather than just reducing it from a -6 on your rolls to a -5. And then again, Greater Restoration, dropping it to 0, kind of cleansing you of all of your stress, which I also really like. I like this mechanic a lot. I think I'll definitely be looking to incorporate it into my games. And I believe we talked about this in a previous video I did where every 24 hours that you go without finishing a long rest gives you a point of stress, because technically staying awake and missing long rests, I believe, does not induce exhaustion. I thought originally when I had done a video on this about resting, and I had thought that that was like a hard and fast rule that if you missed a long rest, it provided you with a level of exhaustion. But that's not the case if I'm recalling. So, let's see. I don't think it says, yeah, there's nothing in the player's handbook that states that exhaustion is caused by lack of rest. As far as I recall, long rests reduce exhaustion. But yeah, it just basically, that's how it is. It just tells you that certain things can cause exhaustion. Starvation might cause exhaustion, being exposed to freezing or scorching temperatures, but none of it actually states, if I'm looking at it right here, right? Some special abilities, environmental hazards such as starvation, long-term effects of freezing or scorching temperatures can lead to a special condition called exhaustion. Certain effects of creatures can also do that, but nowhere does it state that you are given a level of exhaustion when you take a long rest, or when you miss a long rest, rather. So that was something that I think originally, like I said, I feel like that's just like an accepted thing that most DMs do, but nowhere in here, if we search here, we're in the resting section. The only reference to exhaustion is with performing a forced march. There is no references, I don't believe, to food and water, right? You need to have food to reduce exhaustion. So a character can go without food for a number of days equal to 3 plus their constitution modifier. At the end of that day, they suffer a level of exhaustion. If they don't have it, and then the same thing with using water. But there is actually no reference to missing a long rest providing you with exhaustion. But the new fear and stress mechanic would say for every 24 hours where you don't have a long rest, you would get a point of stress. And for anybody who's ever pulled an all-nighter or stayed up for 24 hours or more, and as someone who's done that on multiple occasions in my life, yeah, you're stressed. You might not, like, you kind of get to the point where you're sort of overtired and not, like, you're tired, but you're still functioning and things work fine, but, like, you might be crankier, you might be more susceptible to, you know, being jumpy or, you know, willing to get into fights on stuff because you're just, like, stressed, and that fits into this mechanic really, really well. So there you go, folks. That is the stress and fear mechanics as introduced in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Again, if you combine this with the curses that we just covered in the last video, I think we can both make the argument, and correct me, let me know in the comments, but these are done really well in my mind. That's handled really well. The mechanics are useful enough that anyone could use them in their game, but clean enough that they're not going to muddy stuff up and make it more difficult to understand and to go about implementing them into your games. They're nice and simple, they're easy to understand, and they work also in a fundamental way that makes sense, like in the real world scenario, how they would apply. Like, they're not overly hard to just wrap your head around these mechanics. Which again brings up my point that this chapter 4 is just done very, very well. And I like it a lot. And in some instances, yeah, I wish the book as a whole had the amount of, and you know, I don't even know how much time was dedicated to put together these mechanics, because it's not a whole huge section of the book, but it's done really, really well. So either they put a lot of time on this, or the person who was in charge of them just knocked it out of the park and give them more work because they know what they're doing. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.